I'm going to start by asking each of you to do a little bit of light mental gymnastics. And here's what I'd like you to do. Give some thought to a recent situation where you had a exchange with somebody that elicited an emotional response of some. It could have been when you checked into the hotel. For example, I checked into the hotel. I was met with the person who helps me with the luggage, made me feel terrific. One of those kind of things. I'm gonna make a prediction. We're gonna circle around to this later on in the presentation. I'm gonna predict. Of course, I won't be able to tell you what caused you to feel the way you did, but I will predict with a high degree of certainty why you felt the way you did. In fact, it's likely that if this presentation is effective, each of you will be able to tell why that person felt the way they did as well. Fair enough? Right, so give some thought. You know, we're in a hospital setting primarily. How many of us are in a hospital setting? I'm curious. Of course. Okay, so great. We have lots of opportunities to have positive and negative interactions with people. Give some thought to one of them. I'm hoping at the end of this we can spend some time talking about that. And I believe it'll be the most powerful part of the presentation. Okay. So let's move along. We spend a lot of leadership time and energy figuring out how to motivate and influence others. And we now have some solid neuroscience that tells us how we can do that more effectively. You know, we always wonder what makes people tick. Why do people do and say the things they say and do under certain circumstances? Now we're able to look at the brain. We're able to tell what circuitry is fired up based on the stimulus. And clever people in the neuroscience, social neuroscience world are using that information to change the way we motivate and influence others. We're going to touch on that today. If I'm effective, the result of this hour we have together will cause you to be intrigued enough to go out and explore it a bit further. We're only going to skim the top. All we have time for. There's a depth of information that can be available to us as leaders. And we all are leaders here. We're either trying to lead people that report to us, or we're trying to lead customers in some way. We're trying to get customers to be more cooperative, to look out for our best interests. And we're doing the same if we're in a leadership capacity within our department or organization in some way as well. So I'm going to introduce you to that framework today. It's based on the research of the Neuro Leadership Institute in New York City. And I encourage everyone to look it up if you find this intriguing. I'm a student of the Neuro Leadership Institute, and the founder of that is Dr. David Rock. David Rock and his researchers and neuroscientists have put together mounds of research from around the world that tells us what makes people tick. Why do people do and say the things they say they do? So much of what we discuss here this morning is going to be based on the research of Dr. Rock and his neuroscientists. So the understanding on how our brains work at work. Talk about this. Just to give you some certainty about how this is going to flow, and I'll repeat again what I want to accomplish is that we're going to discuss a little bit about what we've learned about the basic organizing principle of the brain. We're going to talk a bit, what you're going to learn is the SCARF model. SCARF is an acronym. We'll talk about that a bit. We're going to spend some time working that. We're going to talk about the importance of our prefrontal cortex and how we go about our business each and every day, and how it has the limitations that get in our way. And being aware of those limitations will allow us to work more effectively with people and have more people work more effectively with us. We're going to talk about how we can strengthen our ability to respond to threats. So we're all service professionals in here to some extent. And maybe we're in sales, we're directly in service. We're trying to solve someone else's threats. Something is causing them grief. Right? How do we respond when they claim we're not living up to expectations? That's a threat, our status. We're going to talk more about that. And at the end, we're going to talk about, what I mentioned earlier. I want to hear your stories. We'll discuss those. So, as I said, at the end, what I really hope to do is intrigue you enough so that you'll leave here going, man, I need to look into that more. That's really going to be helpful to my department. That's really going to be helpful to the people I'm trying to motivate and help them be happier. Right. So what we know from the research is very fascinating now. What we know is that the basic organizing principle of our brains, most of it is right below the consciousness, has to do with avoiding threats and seeking rewards of some kind. That's it. And the downside of that is that we tend to have a negative bias, and that comes from the time when we were scurrying around the Serengeti trying to avoid saber-toothed tigers. We're looking for the negative all the time. It's the first thing we look for. That's why we focus on problems more than solutions. So it's hardwired into us to see the negative most of the time. Now, the solution to that is become, once we're aware of it, and then we can make efforts to improve that habit, change our habit, and look for the more positive things. But as it is, most people, including our customers, are looking for the negative, and they can't help it. So we're going to talk about the organizing principle of the brain, looking for threats and rewards, and why we tend to look for threats more often than rewards, and as leaders, how we can counter that. The interesting thing about our need to see threats and rewards is that it's very closely tied. The brain circuitry, the neural pathways for detecting threats are very closely tied to our primal needs. Avoiding, I like to use the term saber-toothed tigers back in the day. So we don't have to avoid saber-toothed tigers anymore. We've got other threats that we're mostly concerned about, and they're mostly social. And that's the other aspect of the research that we now know. There are 5 domains of social threats that we're mostly concerned about. And they are certainty, and let's go to one. They are status. We're very concerned about our status. Certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness in our lives. We're going to talk about these in much more detail, but these are the triggers that cause us to behave the way we do, say the things, and act the way we do, and respond to people. So if any one of these 5 is threatened in some way, we tend to go into what the neuroscientists call a threat response, an away state. When we're in an away state, we're not paying attention to the things that are really important. We're mostly concerned, how do we avoid this threat? And the same circuitry in our brains that helped us avoid saber-toothed tigers is now starting to kick into gear. We're going to talk about the nervous system, what that involves, the limbic system as well. On the other hand, as leaders, if we know what drives people, we can work to consciously satisfy those needs. What happens then? They get into a toward state. They're engaged. They really are happy. They want to work with us. They want to do things that makes an impact. They tend to think better. They have insights, and they get along more with others. They're more motivated. So as leaders, what we really want to do is understand the 5 social domains we're mostly concerned about, and give some thought as to how we can satisfy those with our staff and customers. Let's move on. What happens to us when we determine that we are being threatened in some way by one of those 5 social domains? Well, let's talk about the negative, because that's what we focus on most, right? When we're negative, we're distracted, we're anxious, we're stressed. Everybody's, is there anybody that can't relate to this? Of course not. So what happens? We all have experienced the fact that we can't remember things, and we don't focus very well, which means we're not offering our best work or insights. We're not as effective as we want to be. We certainly aren't motivated. On the other hand, take a look at what happens when we are all satisfied and the scarf threads are not being threaded. We're basically happier people. Happier people do better work. Happier people are customers who want to work with us and our patients as well. It could be someone on a nursing floor. Can you imagine the amount of threats that nurses face every single day, particularly when it comes to the scarf model? To me, it's unimaginable. Are there any nurses in here? Well, I love that. I would love if there were, because that would be an insightful conversation. They're being faced with threats every day. We think we are service providers. Can't imagine how nurses must be. Let's talk about why we respond the way we do. It has to do with our limbic system and primarily our amygdala right there. Little walnut-shaped organ inside our brain. The amygdala is primarily like a radar screen for threats. It's searching all the time for threats, scanning our environment. How are you threatening me? How are you threatening me? We don't know it. It's subconscious, but it's so close to our consciousness. We've got to be aware of it, and that's what's happening. So, what happens when we're threatened? It's like an alarm clock to the rest of the brain, or an alarm clock. It's like a fire alarm to the rest of the brain. It sends out a signal, threat, threat, threat. And we've got to be prepared to deal with it. The downside of the other interesting thing to know about the limbic system, it doesn't have a high level of neuroplasticity. What does that mean? That means that it can't be trained and programmed the way other parts of our brain can be. For example, the prefrontal cortex. We can have a high level of neuroplasticity. We can train ourselves to do things, including, by the way, to respond appropriately when the limbic system is screaming at us. There's a threat of some kind. We'll talk more about that. What happens here when the limbic system kicks into gear? Let's talk a bit about that. There's the amygdala. It's detected a threat of some kind, and look what happens. Look how quickly it does. It's spontaneous. It's a reflexive type of response that we don't have any control over, or I should say we don't have much control over. It's going to happen. Look how quickly it happens too, within a millisecond of something happening. You see a snake? Whoa! Before you even realize it's a snake, you jump back. Then you think, oh, it's not a snake, it's just my cable. That's the length of time it takes for us to figure out it's not really a threat. But nevertheless, we still react very quickly to this. So the emotion happens quick. Look what else is that. So when it's sending these signals out to the brain, the rest of the brain's looking for some reason to think, yeah, it is actually a threat. It's starting to determine whether or not we're actually being threatened. And by the time our prefrontal cortex has had a chance to analyze it a bit further, seconds, minutes, maybe an hour has gone by until we finally say, you know what, it wasn't that big a deal after all. Why did I get all upset? So the important takeaway here is that emotions happen, we can't help it. It takes us time to determine whether or not that emotion is a valid emotion or not. And as I said, we can't help, there's no neuroplasticity to our limbic system. There is down here in the prefrontal cortex when the prefrontal cortex gets involved. And that's the part we can change through various techniques, meditation, breath, exercise, and so forth. We hear about a lot. That's real science. There's nothing hokey about meditation and breath from my perspective and from the perspective of neuroscientists as well. Why? Because we can now see what happens when we meditate and we practice breath exercises. What's kicking into gear when the limbic system is activated? Our sympathetic nervous system. Again, we're going to talk more about the negative here because that's what we tend to focus on. When our limbic system is activated, we're facing a threat. What happens? Our pupils dilate. We need to see everything that is possibly going to threaten us. Our mouths go dry. We've all experienced that at one time or another. our heartbeat increases, we need more blood to go to our muscles. We may have to literally fight. Don't forget the same circuitry that is in play when we face social threats now. It's the same circuitry that our ancestors faced when they were trying to avoid saber-toothed tigers on the Serengeti. It's the same circuitry. So of course, we need more oxygen. We need more blood going to our muscles. We may have to run faster, fight. The interesting thing to me has to do with our digestive system. I said earlier that we got dry mouth. It's part of our digestive system. It helps digest our food. Well, our entire digestive system shuts down if we're under threat. Why is that? Well, we don't need it. We're worried about our lives. We're not so concerned about digesting. It's all hardwired. So what tends to happen is that if we're under constant threat, we're stressed. Our digestive system isn't working as well as it would otherwise, and we tend to perhaps gain weight. Our bodies simply aren't working as it should be to process food. And of course, one of the, I hope that you'll find somewhat amusing is the whole relaxed bladder thing. You know, you've scared me so much, I peed myself. Right? You've heard that in movies and such. Well, that's a very natural reaction to someone who's been threatened. Don't forget that threat happens quick. But by the time they realize it wasn't so threatening after all, the damage is done. So what can we do? Well, our parasympathetic nervous system is when we are in the toward state, when we're motivated, when we feel like we really want to take on the project. We want to make a difference. We want to make an impact. We want to work with others. We want to collaborate. Parasympathetic nervous system can be activated if we're aware of it. And we do that in a lot of ways with that involves breath and meditative type exercises. Okay, the breath is the easiest one for all of us. How many of us have been in conversations when they become strained or maybe even heated? And one of us says, you know what? Had enough. I've got to walk away from this. What happens when you walk away? You can do this subconsciously, but there's real science behind it. When we walk away, we activate the basal ganglia. And when we walk or perform any exercises, we're performing patterns. And patterns, believe it or not, even a short walk will allow the prefrontal cortex, which is regulating our sympathetic nervous system and our limbic system, it has a chance to catch its breath, so to speak. So the basal ganglia is kicking in when we're walking. It's detecting the patterns of walk. It doesn't have to think very much when we go for a walk. We're clearing our head. And that's because when the basal ganglia kicks into gear, the activity in the prefrontal cortex slows. In other words, they're inversely proportional. That's why when we feel really stressed, the best we can do is what? Exercise. How many of us exercise here on a regular basis? When you exercise, have you ever gone in and felt really stressed and come out? Boom. Now, we know that now, and there's science behind it. So all we need to do is to find the motivation to take advantage of that when we can. These people on the left, what's happening with them? I can kind of predict what's going on. This is it's recognized worldwide as the symbol of, oh no. Every country does that, you'll see it. Right? And what are they doing? They're subconsciously going to the prefrontal cortex. It's overwhelmed by events. They're not thinking very well. These people aren't focusing on solutions at this point, most likely. They're not the kind of people in this state that would be very effective at solving problems or planning. They're under stress. Their prefrontal cortex is overwhelmed by whatever they're dealing with right now. So I can't tell what caused them to feel that way, but I can tell you that why they are feeling. So keep that in mind. Their prefrontal cortex has a limited amount of capability in the sense that we can wear it out. At the end of the day, when we're feeling emotionally exhausted, we've all had that feeling. What are we really feeling? We're feeling our prefrontal cortex has a limited amount of space and energy throughout our day to function. And the more we call on it to help us control our limbic system, to deal with problems, to plan, strategize in some way, more and more tired it comes. In the neuroscience circles, a lot of scientists call it a stage. It's a stage. And if you put too many actors on the stage, it becomes chaotic. It's exactly what happens. Yep, we can train it. It has a high level of neuroplasticity, but it can be overwhelmed. And it happens to us more than we think. We're limited as far as our ability. So one of the keys to understanding this is that it'll help us. It'll help us use our prefrontal cortex when we need it the most, knowing very well that we only have a relatively limited amount of time. And I guarantee it's not likely to be 8 hours a day. In my case, I can get 4 or 5 hours. I typically perform better in the morning like this. So of course, if I'm messing this up, then it flies in the face of what I think about myself. But bottom line is that in the morning, if you get an email from me, you're probably going to hear me say good morning. That's when I send emails to people. That's when we have conversations with employees. That's when performance appraisals are completed. That's when difficult conversations occur. So if you're in a hospital setting, for example, when's the best time to have that difficult conversation with a nurse manager? Is it at the end of the day after that nurse manager's been dealing with rest? That's all day long? No, not likely. Right? You're more likely to have conversations with somebody in the morning, for the most part. And there are night owls that say they function better at nighttime. You get it. You get the idea, right? In my case, I can speak for myself. If I'm going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, it's better to have it in the morning, and I'm more effective. I count on them to be more effective in responses as well. The light bulb is there to remind me to let you know that the the brain, it weighs about 3 pounds approximately, but it uses up 20% of our metabolic energy. The energy we put in our body is sucked away by the brain. It's like a refrigerator. It's running all the time. And 12 watts of energy a day. And so, being aware of how energy consuming the brain is helps us plan our day effectively. So, if we're going to do planning, anything like that, perhaps you want to do it in the morning. Probably not the best time to check your emails. Maybe because it doesn't require a whole lot of brain energy to read through emails. It requires a lot more energy to respond to emails. So that's why you would get an email from me. I may, John, I may get your email in the afternoon. You probably won't get a response from me until the morning, because I feel like I can be more effective and have more of an impact. My thought processes are better when I come in the morning and I generate those kind of insights that add value to you. Let's talk about the keys, how we motivate people. We'll talk about these on an individual level, right? Status. Status is where we are compared to other people that we're around. It's one of the major drivers of our behavior. And as leaders, we need to think about how we are influencing others in a negative way by threatening their status. And one of the biggest issues with a leader has to do with micromanaging somebody. Has anyone in here ever been micromanaged by anybody? You all can relate to that, I think, in some way. And what's happening there? What's happening is you had a manager who was looking over a very important project in their mind. They didn't have the confidence in you to really take care of it. status. They're basically saying, you know what, I got to look over you extra closely, Tyler, because I don't think you're really up for the task. How does that make you feel? Does that make you feel smart? Does that make you feel insightful? Does that make you feel trusted? Absolutely not. It's the number one, in my opinion, worst thing we can do to employees. None of that with customers. I'll tell you a story. I spent 18 years working with animal laboratories, and I was doing field service work in clinical laboratories. Been to Dartmouth, Chicago a lot of times over the years, other places here as well. One time on a Saturday morning, I received a call from a nurse who had desktop analyzers, and she said, you know, we were in here last night, worked perfectly. We came in this morning, tried to turn it on, it wouldn't turn on. So I'm in my 20s. I'm basically a biomed field service person. What did I say? I said, is it plugged in? And she proceeded to let me have it. I had challenged her status. She was probably, you know, my age, much older. She's savvy. When I asked her if it was plugged in, she went ballistic. What happened? I insulted her status and her intelligence. Right? And so I didn't mean to do that, but I was young and dumb. And if I would have had, you know, training like this, I certainly would have avoided saying it that way. Maybe what I should have said was, you know, is it possible that the cleaning people came in last night, moved it around, and dislodged the AC cord? If I would have said it that way, we could have avoided that whole mess. In fact, that's what the problem was. I just didn't have the sanity to figure that out. So I had to ask her. That was, you know, it was a rough conversation. And it could have been avoided had I known the importance of status. So my challenge to each of you is to give that some thought. Think about how your status may have been threatened at some time during your careers, and how you can increase the status of your customers, nurses and so forth, and also how you can increase the status of people that directly report to you. Some of the easiest ways to do it is to provide training. We all feel better about ourselves if we're offered opportunities to develop ourselves. Training is one of those ways. You just told me you're going to training. Tell me about how that feels. When you feel motivated to go?
I say it's about time.
Why is it about time?
Because they promised all kinds of stuff. Didn't follow through.
Exactly right. How does that make you feel?
Taken.
So they need to understand. You can feel better about yourself and do better work if they thank you. Great example. Training is a big deal. Self-developmental opportunities that Calyx can provide that. And our guys never had to experience that. It makes them feel better about themselves. They feel more professional. And when we receive training or any kind of self-development opportunities, heck, even coming here today may have been a status for you. Yeah. Does anybody feel good about being here? I'm expecting every hand to go. Yeah, of course, right. I used to love coming to these kind of things. You know, it's fun. And it makes us feel good and the good chemicals. So that's the importance of status. And we can't dig into it. We can't go into it too deeply. If anyone would like to, I'm happy to talk later. Go into it as deep as you like. But give some thought. Take away here for each of these 5 social domains. Just give some thought at how it relates to you. How you can help use this little bit of knowledge we're sharing here today to help your customers, particularly, and your people be happy. Certainty. Our brains are pattern recognizing machines. We need to have certainty in our lives. If we don't, we're incredibly uptight. And the other thing that happens, if we don't have certainty about what's going to happen, we tend to fill in the blanks. And when we fill in the blanks, we're guessing. And again, keeping in mind that we have a negative bias. So what are we going to fill in the blanks with? Most often, negative related situations. Exactly right. What's that do? It sets off a threat response. Oh my God. How many people have been through a merger? Right? Well, I'd love to hear those, how you felt then when that happened, right? So how was communication during that process? What'd you say? Terrible. Made you feel bad? So one of the things we can do when it comes to in removing the threat of uncertainty is simply to communicate. It may be something like, we are going through a merger. I don't know much right now, but I've got a meeting next Tuesday and I'll know more then. At least we're giving somebody some certainty about when they can find out information. I have been with Calyx, we travel to biomed departments all over the Northeast. I've actually been in a department where the rumors of a merger actually came true that day. And those people were purely distressed. They were uncertain what's going to happen to us. What's the reporting structure? They were talking out loud, and it was stressful. And they weren't thinking the way they would normally think in that particular day. So communication is a big deal when it comes to certainty, and if we don't have it, it's a threat response. We're not going to do our best for it. So again, I would say after each of these, think about your situation as a leader. How can you create more certainty for your customers, your people, even in your families, frankly, to make people feel better? And when you make them feel better, give them a certainty, they will work better for you and care about you. Show it's a matter of caring as well, from my perspective. I don't want you to be stressed, Tyler. This is going on right now. We're going to get through it. Here's what I know. Here's when I'll know more. Boom. Tells you I care about you. And by the way, I'm recognizing that you may be stressed. It's a caring thing. Autonomy. Autonomy is our ability to have control over our events. If we don't feel like we have the ability to respond on our own, we feel really uptight. We're not happy. We're forced to do something we don't necessarily believe to be in our best interest. So autonomy is a big driver of how we behave. We can give people autonomy in a lot of different ways. So for example, I'll tell you a story about someone at Calyx some years ago who came in one morning, clearly was stressed. Had a conversation with him, told me that he's got a couple kids, he's late for work. He liked everybody to be there at 7:30. And so the bottom line was, geez, it doesn't, if you think about it, what does it matter what time you get to work? Unless there's a meeting or something. So for us telling him he had to be there at 7:30 caused him stress throughout the morning as he was working to get his ready. Bottom line is, he didn't feel like he had any autonomy. If he got there late, he felt like he would be in trouble, which it wasn't the case. It was just waking up. So it took, we had a conversation. Basically, it's like, it doesn't matter. If you're here at 7:30, 8 o'clock, I don't want you being stressed about your morning. His entire morning was ruined because he felt like he had to be there at 7:30. Just one little example of how we as leaders can help people be happier. Just giving them that option. You have to set ground. Now, one of the things I didn't talk about in certainty was setting expectations. We do need to set expectations. People are okay with expectations. That gives them a certainty of what we expect. It's when they don't know what we expect that causes them stress. So if we give an expectation, say in my example, look, 7:30, 8 o'clock, somewhere between then, we're perfectly fine with that if you don't mind working a bit later. It's up to you. He was thrilled. Suddenly, his mornings went from being especially stressful because of his kids and his wife, she's a professional, to being like, oh my gosh, I can now relax in the morning. Not have to rush around, right? I can even go for a walk and exercise, so I don't have to be there. See, it's just a communication. So setting expectations with certainty actually creates comfort for people and allows much more autonomy. So again, I would ask, think about how you can offer more autonomy to people that you want to impact in some way, customers, family, even employees, giving them choices, like choices, even if it's just one or two. If I say, so I can't see your name. Hi, Chuck. I say, Chuck, you have to do it this way. How's that sound? What if I say, Chuck, we got 3 ways we do it. Which one do you think is better? What am I telling you? I'm telling you that I trust you to make the choice. It's not my decision. That's the autonomy, and it makes a world of difference in our heads. Relatedness. We all need a sense of relatedness. In other words, how do we stack up, or how do we relate to those around us? We tend, because of our negative bias, to view people as foes most often. Now, if you think about it, that goes all the way back to when, again, we were scurrying around the Serengeti and we crossed paths perhaps with another tribe. We didn't know. They were, that's what this neuroscience tells me. I wasn't there, but supposedly it comes back from the time when we were approached by people. We weren't sure if there was going to be a good interaction or negative interaction. We still carry that with us today. If we're aware of it, if we're aware that somebody could potentially be a friend, then we're more likely to say, hey, Tyler, why don't you have breakfast with me? But most of us wouldn't do that. Would you ask a stranger to have breakfast with you? No. I don't know. Maybe you would. But if we're aware that our initial response, and it's a quick response, is that somebody potentially is going to make us feel uncomfortable in some way, that's a bold response. So be aware of that. Let's talk about these guys here a little bit. So these guys are part of a tribe, and we tend to do that. We like people who are a lot like us. Slightly, you're an HTM, you're an HTM, you're an HTM, you're an HTM. You're all gonna, if you knew that each other were an HTM, you would say, hey, I'm an HTM too. Wow, right? If you're an HTM, you're an HTM, I'm a sales guy. Are we really, would you consider that relatable? Maybe not, right? Unless I'm a sales guy who can really help you solve some kind of problem. Then you find out, but you don't find that initially, right? It's interesting. So look at these characters, right? These guys are all part of a tribe here. We tend to make tribes. We have more fun around people who are like us. These guys obviously like the Yankees. They obviously like Aaron Judge. Now I'm a Red Sox fan. So, being from New England, you may know the Yankees are our arch enemies. So these guys, when I look at these guys, I'm going to say something disparaging, and we will come back to it later. I'm going to say, look at these fools. Look at that. They're worshiping a 23-year-old. How old they are? Worshiping 23-year-old. This guy's even negative. He's giving it the thumbs down, right? I don't know. Those guys, typical Yankee fans, are probably obnoxious. Okay, keep in mind.
Cubs fan.
Well, St. Louis, right? St. Louis and the Cubs. Okay, so all right, so we're going to talk about reappraisal here today. I'm going to reappraise these guys in a different way. Let's move on here. Oops. Fairness. Fairness is our sense that we are being treated the way we believe we should be treated in a fair way. Equality. Are we equal? If I report to Tyler and you report to Tyler and he lets you come in late every day, lets you behave in a certain way, and doesn't let me behave, and I notice that, and I will, because I'm really alert to that kind of status threat. How's that going to make us all work together more effectively? It's a sense of fairness. To me, it's one of the biggest issues we have in our country right now. Is fairness concern amongst everybody. So when we're in a hospital setting, how do we ensure that we're doing things fairly? Fairness is one of those that really demonstrates, in my view, how interrelated 5 social domains are. Because we can have unfairness when it comes to certain. So in other words, if Tyler if I report to Tyler and he's not being clear about expectations, that's not fair to me. I don't really know what to do. I'm a victim. He's not setting expectations that I can really follow. That's not fair. Well, by the way, it affects my relatedness to Tyler as well, right? Tyler's always, he's never really telling me what needs to be done, what is expected of me. So what's that do? It causes me to view Tyler more as a foe as opposed to an advocate for me. His lack of clarity is causing me the possibility of losing my status if I make a mistake. Fairness is one of the biggest drivers we have, and you see it every single day in our culture and in the world, frankly. People die because of concerns about fairness. All right, so I mentioned those Yankee fans, and we could use Cardinal fans too. Anybody here from St. Louis? Good. All right, so how do we effectively deal with a negative mindset like I had? By the way, when I was analyzing those Yankee fans, did I sound like somebody you might want to hang out with? It was disparaging, positive in any way. In fact, I probably elicited some kind of photos, and if you were a Yankee fan, you certainly could have done that. So there's ways we do it. I've got friends who are teachers. Some of them dread going back to school. They dread the end of the summer. Some of those same teachers I'm from State College, Pennsylvania, Penn State football. Some of those same teachers have Penn State football fans. They love going back to school. Why? Because it's football season. So they've reappraised and they've labeled and reappraised their situation differently than the teachers who are unhappy because the summer's over. They can't go to the beach. That's one strategy we can use to look at situations differently. We'll use you again, Tyler. Tyler and I have a negative conversation. One of the most difficult things we can do is say, Tyler, I understand. Let me see if I understand your position. That comment alone tells Tyler I care. I want to understand what he's trying to think. He might not be expressing it very well, and that's okay. But I'm trying to understand what he's thinking. We're listening to each other rather than talking to each other. That's reappraisal. It's not me saying, hey, Tyler, you're simply wrong. It's me saying, let me understand. I really want to understand. And me somewhat subconsciously admitting I may be wrong, which we don't ever want to do. Why? Why don't we want to say we're wrong? Status. Yeah, we don't ever admit we're wrong. That's our status. Although, if we're in a leadership position, admitting you're wrong is a good thing. Why? We are volunteering to finish our status to some extent. So let's say that Tyler reports to me, and I haven't given him the certainty that he needs to do this job the way he feels like he needs to do it. He tells me, exactly right. I really dropped the ball on that. I'm volunteering to drop my status somewhat so he relates better to me. It's a very effective strategy for helping people get onto your side if you do it sincerely. If you don't do it sincerely, you'll sense it. And in fact, my status hasn't dropped at all. I volunteered to do that. He thinks higher of me, which actually raises my status back up. But that's up to him. Keep that in mind. It's powerful. So one of the strategies is simply to reappraise our situation in some way and look at it from the other person's perspective. All professionals here would probably have heard that before. Try to look at it from the other person's perspective. Now, there's some neuroscience behind that. It tells you how effective it is as far as motivating and influencing others. So I want to go back to these Yankee fans. Okay. So I'm going to reappraise these Yankee fans. And I'm going to do that by saying, I'm a baseball fan as well. Love baseball. Like I said, I'm a Red Sox fan. So the series with the Yankees is really the only series I have any interest in throughout the year. It's on my age. Right? And I do that because of the passion between our teams. They used to hate each other. I think they kind of love each other now, which takes a little bit of the fun away. Do you think? Right? So I mean, they're a little bit too friendly these days for me. But the bottom line is, there was a day when they hated each other and there were fights and things like that. Fans weren't happy. They were adversaries. So, but as a baseball fan, I love these guys. And they're passionate about the game. I'm passionate about the Red Sox. They just have to be passionate about the Yankees. Think about how much fun it would be to go to a Red Sox Yankee game with these characters. How much fun that would be. They'd be into it. I'd be into it. Wouldn't that be the best baseball? It'd be like going to St. Louis Cardinals Cubs game. You're with a bunch of people that are as passionate as you are about baseball. I want to hang out with these guys. In fact, I'll tell you a little side story here. Actually, they go to the Yankee Stadium, dressed in my Red Sox, and was treated for the most part pretty well. There's a couple of that's at 80 degrees. And but the bottom line is, the majority of the Yankee fans loved that we were there, as long as we weren't obnoxious, and we weren't. They're happy we were there. We had a great time with them. So who do you want to hang out with? The guy who was disparaging and had a negative attitude toward these guys, or the guy who really like, man, these guys are pretty cool because they're so passionate about their team. They're part of their tribe. We would expect them to be passionate about their tribe. That's what people do. All right. So let's go back now. How are we doing time-wise here? Is anyone keeping track? I don't have anyone to help me here. I didn't start my watch. 9:21. Okay, we have 10 minutes. All right. So now, is it okay if we circle back and talk about that? Yeah. So I gave you the autonomy to do that, but thank you for giving me that privilege. And again, it's you may think, hey, it's effective. You know, asking someone permission to go back is another strategy to give them the option. Say, no, I don't really have time for that. Speaking of that, I got to do this something for you. How many people pick up the phone and have someone go, hello, how are you? Do that, right? It's a terrible thing to say. Why? First of all, it's disingenuous. Don't really care something. Let me ask that question. Now, how does that make you feel? Like, uh-oh, I'm somewhat threatened. This person's going to waste my time. Isn't it much more effective when you call somebody and say, I called you at a bad time. Is this a good time? That recognizes and gives them status. Tells you that you're being sensitive to their needs. And I can tell you, I make phone calls, I talk to busy people. And the ones who give me the courtesy of picking up the phone, I always ask that. And it's not uncommon for them to say, you know what, I'm in a meeting tomorrow. Time, 9, call me 9, goodbye. Guess what, when I call them at 9 o'clock the next day, they pick up the phone. That's the status. They're saying, hey, I want to talk with you. Thank you for, essentially, I appreciate you considering that I might have been busy at that time. I don't ever assume that people are less busy. Yeah. All right, that's it. Can we circle back to the stories? Come on. Yeah, I knew that was going to happen, brother. Wow. Anybody have a story they want to share? Tell me about the situation. Okay, thank you.
So I was flying out here on the Southwest flight, and I was sitting in a seat. There was a pilot in 2 seats over against the window. You know, he just reached out and started talking to me, and I was like, oh, that's nice. He's actually talking to me, and we're talking about different things. And then I found out he was in the Marine Corps like me, so we had that relatedness thing going on, and it was a good conversation. I felt like it was included, like part of the crew, so to speak. So that's what came up.
Ha. Love that. So your status was affected, made you feel good, pilot talks to me. It's kind of like when a celebrity takes the time to talk to us. We feel like we're someone important. But that's a good one. Thank you. Anybody else have one like that?
Not a story, but advice. So we just had a performance improvement plan for a 25-year employee. Performance was kind of slipping. So our engineering team put our own plan together. HR torpedoed it. I never heard of the SCARF method, but clearly, everything on the performance improvement plan had everything in there. And he gave us notice within 2 weeks. So is this stuff you take into account when you're dealing with a situation like that, or at that point, it's kind of a non-issue because you have to get into that nitty-gritty stuff?
From my perspective, it's a problem that needs to be fixed with HR. So the SCARF model is, when I talk about a new leadership model, it replaces the old carrot and stick method of performance appraisals. So I give you a performance appraisal and I say, of course, I'm going to see all the negative things, right? We have a negative bias. I'm going to say, you can do this better. You can do that. It took you too long. Your PM takes an hour and a half. Everybody else in the shop is doing theirs in 45 minutes. What's the problem? Those are all threats. You're not working well on that. You've got to find another way. The easiest way to do that may be to help you find your own way. For example, what can we do? What can we do, Craig? Now, I noticed that it's taking you an hour and a half. You're doing a great job with your PM, that PM. Notice it's taking you an hour and a half. Is there anything that you can do while you're continuing to do a good job that can cut it shorter? How can I help you? It's a much more effective way to have that conversation than say, you know what? I'm doing this 45 minutes. Why is it taking you an hour and a half? It's still pending. That's a threat. Your HR department threatened that person, and you really sent them as far as it sounds. And it's unfortunate. The cost of replacing employees is significant. He's an imaging guy too, right? They're already hard to come by. So this method here, by the way, the training that I've gone through is primarily, the other people that have been in the training with me, primarily are HR related things. Most of them aren't management. Most HR. They're learning this. The Neuro Leadership Institute out of New York City. And anyone, we're all going to have each other's contact information. Feel free to send me an email. And I'm happy to connect you. To me, it just opens up a world of possibilities when it comes to happiness and effectiveness.
So what made you pursue this?
I've wondered my entire life, like why people do things they do. And I've always wanted to do things differently, better, and think differently. I often wondered what makes a great leader think the way they do. Why do these leaders react so well under stress and pressure? They seem to have the answer. I wonder what that is. I'm pretty sure this is it. They figured it out. Now, the science might not have been, but they somehow figured it out throughout my career. 60 years old, I've been thinking about this stuff since I was 18. Wondering, why is that guy so graceful? Why is that person so graceful in how they go about their business? So I think this is it. Just a long time to find it. Wish I would have found it in my 20s. It's like, yeah, so that HR person, that HR department needs to think about things a little different from my perspective. That's a great example of how we can really torpedo somebody who, yeah, maybe they were falling short of expectations, but the question is, were they, how aware of those expectations were they? It'd be interesting. It would be a fascinating conversation if you can start from the back. Let's look at this really close. See how we could have done things differently. Because guess what? If it's not fixed now, it's going to happen again in the future. Anything else anyone wants to share? I had one the other day. I was in the gym here, and I was on the elliptical, and I finished. And there was a guy on the elliptical right next to me. And as I got off the elliptical, all he did was turn to me and go. I'm telling you, it was sweet. It made me feel good. He gave me the, hey, good for you, And that's what we need. We need positive reinforcements like that. It creates relatedness. It helps us have better relationships with people. And as leaders, we don't have people that are pulling for us. They're detecting threats and they're pulling against us. We have a leader that meets all of the SCARF social domain elements. It's a person we want to marry. They're working to help us be happier in life. Forget about work. But happier people do better work. We're more motivated. We want to do better work. As professionals, there's one thing we want to do. We want to make an impact. Think about how you go about your day. You want to make an impact. You're probably here at this conference because you want to learn something that allows you to go back and make an impact. Somebody, something, some process. That's a wonderful way to go about life, in my view. And so, I think we're about out of time here. But again, if anyone would like to discuss it more, stop by our booth. We have a booth out here. I'd love to talk with you about that. And if you have a calibration story to tell us, I'd love to hear those as well. It's one of the reasons why we come here to hear those stories. And I thank you for all your attention and the head nods and things like that. I'm grateful. It makes me feel, it improves my status. And, hope that you found something in it. Wow. It'll give you something to think about. Thank you.